since Suzanne is not here, I wrangled my spouse into reading as well. I don't have a formal bio for him, but he has some work upcoming in Agni. Some work just came out in Cincinnati Review. And he's the winner of last year's 92Y Discovery Prize. He got to go to New York City to the 92Y and give a reading there. So that's my impromptu bio, sorry.
I didn't realize, find out I'd be doing any poetry until, I don't know, 45 minutes ago, an hour ago, something like that. So I'll do my best, although I haven't tried to recite from memory in a while. Poem. Like a yellow light means drive faster. Like the metal stem of an umbrella makes one feel larger in a lightning storm. Like night makes passages vaster. Like death makes words mean more. Like rain fills footprints a fox left in silt. Like one's lips become lampreys, smuggling purple blood in death's wake. Like love is the word most likely to wilt. Like the heart is dragged like a lake. Like a good river hugs its cities to sleep. Like the nearest star to the darkness of shark eyes kisses the lilies alive. Like a slaughterhouse worships its guise of trees. Like a ghost bites the end of a line. Like a hawk forsakes a starling's feathers. Like a closet trapped inside a ghost, opens and shuts like an aortic valve. Like a song despises the cage it weathers. Like a fractured bone forgives itself. Like a good moon carves its oceans askew. Like the human eye sculpted into a whale sinks back to a deeper, older dark. Like hope dismantles the gatehouse in you. Like the dead drag the moats of the heart. Portents. Or we are an ocean thrown across the surface of a leaf, turning, or all color will evaporate, like a lake where fish once glowed and swam, like little moons here and there. Or cockroaches and roses will hold communion in the fallout of our thinking, or the mind is water in a wicker basket, or the hungry knife will be eaten by a hematic anti-mirror. Or what was a voice will be replaced by a hole whose limit is the sound of blood moving through you like wind. Or the last light will go out, or a miracle may invade the natural, or it is already too late. Moon. Wet moon on blue stem, if sound is enough, if sound is enough, trillium tryst, mouth full of dark roses, if image is enough, if image is enough, weeping gladiolus, frangipani at dusk, if fragrance is enough, if flavor is enough, moonseed paralysis, gold shadow of monkshood, if faith is enough, if touch equals faith, moons do not exist, rose shadows wither when the hedge is on fire, if love is enough, chrysanthemum kiss, blue light licks the lakeshore, if the moon's a damned liar, if the moon's wet enough, incinerate this. I Googled myself recently, and somebody had translated that poem, which was published in 32 poems, into Hungarian. And then when Google translated it back into English, moonseed paralysis, and moonseed is a toxic plant, I think native to North America. It translated it back as the paralysis of lunar sperm, which I thought sounded pretty cool. I don't know if anybody knows Clayton Eshelman. It sounds like something Clayton Eshelman might write, but let's see. I guess a couple more, maybe? All right. A wren, which is what death is. A wren, which is what death makes. A song that echoes, which is what we listen for. The nearness of feathers, which are those that bind us, conduits of blood and warehouses of air, which is where we begin to hunger for the sky inside our bodies, which is where a wren collects twigs, grass, nest things. Wren is one of my favorite words. I like the bird too, but I just like wren as a word also. Something about the way that your mouth curls up with wren as opposed to like wrench or something like that just like puts a smile on my face. I'll do one last poem and another wren poem. Although it's a sort of depressing wren poem. It's all about death just like the last one is. But I really liked like scary stories when I was a kid, and there was this anthology called Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Which was mostly just oral traditional, fictional sorts of stories. But there were some poems in there too, and one of the poems was called the Hearse Song, which is a song that soldiers, I think in World War II, used to sing before going into battle. It was a way of making light of death before so many of them would inevitably die. And the Hearse Song goes, don't you ever laugh as a hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you in a big white sheet from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you with dirt and rocks, and things go well for about a week, but then your coffin starts to leak. And the worms crawl in and the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle in your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. And a big green worm with glowing eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You put it on a slice of bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead. So this is a song that was going to battle. I was asking myself, what would that sort of like a death song sound like if you were to really try to put it in terms of like contemporary poetry? And this is what I came up with. This is called When. When there's a wren in the bordello, a red wine wren, when soprano enters the voice of a shadow bled from the ear, and that shadow is your end, when your death is just another sentence in a sermon, so few will hear, that's when the rabbit doesn't breathe in order to breathe again, when abstractions exhumed from the body are less like bluebirds and more like bricks, as concrete as imminence, when the temple of the body splits in two, that's when our skeletons in their cellars of roots assemble, a mansion of precise silence, when our gardens of stone outnumber the clouds in any one sky or all living flowers, when you lay the last brick in the wall and that brick is you, that's when the wren comes back to beat closed the shutters, when the final curtain is made of wrens sewn together, struggling to escape each other, when that curtain's flown open and you see your own closed eyes between wrens trying desperately not to be the curtain to your dying, that'll be when.
I'm going to read my bio because it's weird to give my own introduction, but Elizabeth Threadgill, holds an MFA in poetry and a PhD in developmental education literacy, both from Texas State University, which is right in central Texas near Austin. I grew up in Marfa, Texas, as I mentioned to you. And now, of course, I live in Utica and work at Utica College as an assistant professor of English, where I coordinate the developmental writing program. Tangled in the Light is my poetry debut. I'm going to be reading from this chapbook as well as some newer poems. I have them kind of interspersed in here. I paper clipped them in. As you can see just by looking, the poems in the book are micro poems. They're very small. What I was working at was kind of taking a microscopic view of the natural world and juxtaposing it with the vastness of the universe that we're all a part of. So these poems are very small because we're very small in our universe as well. They're very much inspired by rural areas, in particular rural Texas where I grew up, and they're also inspired by the Imagist movement. So each poem is looking at a single image or a single moment in time. So the title of the chapbook, Tangled in the Light, is taken from a Jim Harrison poem in which he writes, "In truth, each day is a universe in which we are tangled in the light of stars." So it definitely serves as inspiration for the whole project. I'll start with the first poem in the book, and then I'll weave my way through. This is called Doe. A doe stops on the edge of reason, just outside the glow, just outside myself. I keep her in my periphery, like a silk scarf tucked in a jacket sleeve, brushing the back of my hand, knowing it could fall away at any moment. Deer legs. Watching my father string the soft spots in deer legs, wrapping them like vining ballet slippers around my calves, a doe twirling on twine. Rifle fire. Dove rifled like a drawer, turned out, sun falling behind a shelf, the sound of it deafening like a shelf, turned out, sun falling out over the world, fire blazing, wings failing, burning down. Rabbit. To have flinched at the rabbit, heart fluttering faster than mine. But wouldn't doves have taught better the blind, wild fear hurtling out of tall grass, whirring past my ear like shrapnel, cutting the air with singular purpose? Pastoral. Imagine 50,000 mornings, a small fox in the coop, hints of feathers in the heart, space between gunfire in waxy twilight, the world delineated, the horses from my childhood far away, ringing in my ears, horsehair, swishing to keep the flies out of my head. Horse. Hooves like heavy petals, making frantic flowers around a snake's coiled form. I could draw flower stems in the sand, dragging the long, limp body. This poem is written for my family's pet goat. Her name is Eve. We had her for over a decade. She's kind of like the Sancho goat, I guess. The Sancho goat is like the leader goat that the other goats will follow, and so if you call the Sancho goat, then she'll come and she'll bring all the other goats too. And very cleverly, it's titled Goat. The goat is singing, half songs rolled in sweet grain, joyous tongue, like the child making moons with her mouth. Unusual pellet contents after owlpages.info. A pigeon egg, embryo intact, a cardinal, a cloth wrapped around the mouse, as if a shroud. If you dissect carefully, you can find a clue, plastic rope in the grasp of prey, classifieds, lost dogs, snowy fields. Duck feathers. Because they are like radiant bone splintering outward, her dress pouring from her as she wades into the after. Immensity. Clouds are only a forest, pine feathers stretching between skylines, but stars exhaust what we are. One of the great things about growing up in Marfa and rural West Texas in general is that the skylines, the horizons are vast, more so than anyone that hasn't seen them could ever imagine. And there's also an insane number of rabbits. So my next couple of poems deal with both of those things together, the juxtaposition of these huge skylines that just fill everything with these tiny rabbits. This is called Rabbits. Not very clever with my titles. On the horizon, silhouettes akin to wings and knives, blood pink like plum skin against time. Horizon. But no rabbit could run the length of every day renewed. This is goodbye, the coyote carrying a rabbit as we lean into one another. Both of those poems I wrote whenever we went to Marfa. I took my spouse, who's from the Chicago area, to see my hometown. So whenever we were there for our last anniversary last spring, these poems came into being. Far away. In the deep, deep shining before the hour, a smoldering quilt laid out over dried fields of mice and rabbits. Moth. A moth caught in the tendrils behind your ear, wings dancing there, wilted petals in a breeze. To pluck it, like a dusty coin, monuments fly free, back into space, swinging far. Life comes before the stars break, showering our heads with sparks, as if we are the welders, as if we are engineers of our arcs, as if we were the architects of sight. So throughout the chapbook, it starts in pre-dawn and it moves into night. So that was the final poem in the book. But I have one more. It's my newest poem to read for you. It's a poem that's written in columns, so it can be read across or you can read it down. So I'm going to do two versions of the poem for you. Dispersed. She is the star in the palm of my hand. We are each a galaxy of new stars and dead stars shining lifetimes after they have passed. Each self that touches our own becomes wed to our own and begins boring into the tin can luminaria of our existence, like piercing a box with air holes for the cricket, and our song comes finally pouring out. She is the star in the palm of my hand. We are each of new stars and stars shining after they have passed. Each self that touches our own becomes wed to our own and begins boring into luminaria, like piercing a box with air holes for the cricket comes a galaxy, dead lifetimes, the tin can of our existence, and our song finally pouring out. Thanks. I didn't tell him I was going to make him go last, but that's what happened. Gary Leising holds an MFA from the University of South Carolina and a PhD from the University of Cincinnati. He's the author of the poetry book, The Alp at the End of My Street, which is up here, as well as two poetry chapbooks, Fastened to a Dying Animal and Temple of Bones. And one of those is up here as well. His work has appeared in many literary journals, including Cincinnati Review, Gargoyle, Prairie Schooner, and River Styx. And, of course, he lives in upstate New York, Utica area, with his wife and two sons, where he's a professor of English at Utica College and my chair. So please welcome Gary Leising.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I'm going to read a couple of poems here from the two collections that are here, and some newer stuff. A few years, maybe not even a few years back, about 2 years back, I think, River Styx, this journal, did an issue about Americana. It was the theme. And so when they announced the theme, I wrote some new poems for it. And right, they say send in 5 poems or whatever it is. And I wrote 4 poems about Americana before the deadline. And then think I can send in 5. Well, I'm going to pull this one out. It's set in America. And of course, that's the one that they take. And so this poem is called Blues. When the boy put down his guitar and trusted the owners of the place to keep it safe backstage while he took the little pay from his set to buy a six-pack, did he think that if his shiny black axe was gone, taken by one of the poorly paid security staff, taken by the rough guy who stood up front during the show, scowling at every solo, at every bent note wailing through the fuzzy amps, taken by someone desperate enough to hawk the instrument, his only possession besides the two matching suits to wear on stage, did he think that someone else's theft would send him back to the Delta, back to pick cotton to earn in a week what he'd net for 2 shows a night, bending those shiny guitar strings and watching gorgeous girls dance? Oldest son, there'd be no joy at his return, no father offering a feast, no way he could know a thing, tipping the first bottle up to swallow the last few drops before he hurled it across the road to shatter near the railroad tracks outside that roadhouse. No way to know what man his mama would be with. Even at his age, a man, it would be back to grandma. By the time he finished the 3rd beer, he'd admit why he was drinking so fast, drinking what he earned, throwing away the deposits on each bottle. Because he was black, because the geography was this: train tracks, road, clabbered dive, a field of weeds, another road, crumbling storefronts for the poor like him, another road, then better stores and even better stores than homes for all the whites he'd never see dancing, he was sure. When he threw the 6th bottle, he heard it hit and bounce. No way it didn't break on the steel rail. He walked to see it whole, a miracle. He left it for someone poorer than he to turn in for the deposit he'd paid. Miracle. His guitar was there. He'd play the 2nd set and marvel at the black women of every size spilling out of every kind of dress. It was Arkansas, the 40s. He swore he'd never leave his guitar again, swore someday the white folks across those many roads would dance for him. Even if that never happened, he told himself. Even if I play dives like this and worse forever, I'll still be B.B. King, still never pick cotton again. So about the last half of that is part of that, right? Just that memory of throwing that bottle and finding it not broken, and going back in and playing and swearing at that point he would never go back. That's true. That's right out of a story B.B. King used to tell on stage, and then I kind of tried to build a story around it. So another newer poem, sort of started about a year and a half ago, I guess. I went to the Writers' Conference in Squaw Valley. They have a poetry writers' conference there that's different than most other conferences because instead of bringing in work you've already done and giving it to somebody who's the master poet at the workshop, every day you go into a different group. They mix you up in different ways. And every day you're supposed to bring in a new poem. Rather than bring in things you've already written. It's usually, I've been there twice, it's usually really easy the first couple of days because right, you always have ideas somehow are in your mind, and by the time you get to about the 4th day, you're sort of feeling the stress. What am I going to write about? I don't have any more ideas for poems, and I've just gotten to know all these people that are around all the time. So when there's the reading and lecture at night, now I'm staying out and hanging out with them and talking instead of going back to the room by myself. And then, it's in the mountains, so you think now is a good time to go hiking, but I've got a poem tomorrow. In that area, there are lots of these sort of cottages, rental house. They become rental houses during ski season, and lots of bears. So all of them have these bear-proof fences around. and some of the houses we would use as places for the workshop, right? And so you would have to figure out how to get in these complicated gate systems that, supposedly kept the bears out, where there's two different locks you have to do at the same time. So that all came into one of my poems that came out of that experience of being there. This is called The Charming Bear. It dug through my trash for gorgonzola and popped the slimy hunk in its mouth, using its claws like human fingers. Though it couldn't have. They can't. It would overcome the lock on the bear fence, I knew. I could read its mind as it polished off my food waste and moved on to my mail. Invoices, statements, blood test results, all things my wife said, shred. But around here, who steals your trash? This bear. He looked at me, and I knew he was going to steal my identity. Could he hack my accounts? Had he overheard my mother's maiden name? The neighbor's garage door thundered open, and he ran. To get him back, I took a styrofoam tray of ground beef, ripped away the plastic wrap, and squeezed the soft mass so the juices dripped and its scent blossomed a message in my yard. Bear, a gift. On all fours in the bushes, my own hands smelled like sweet iron. I licked the juice from one, plucked tiny red berries from the shrub, smiled over the ants and water bugs weaving among the moist pine mulch. I shoved a handful in my mouth, chewed it like gum, forgetting where I was and why. So, one of the things, right, in my bio said I live with my wife and children. One of the things when you have kids and they go off to school, they start to have this life that you don't know anything about. And you have to rely on them to tell you what's happening to them at school and what their, right, that landscape of their experiences and their emotional experiences. And sometimes they don't tell you anything, right? Even when you have all those parenting book strategies of how do you talk to them and how do you get them to tell you what's really happened, right? You don't just say, what did you do today? Because they'll say, nothing. Was it good? Yes. Right? And then when you find out something's bad happened, you want to both, right, take care of them somehow and also teach them how to negotiate the world on their own. So this is a poem that came out of that experience. Called To the Child Who Bullied My Son on the First Grade Playground. So, how do you address that other, because you want to address that other kid, right? Because your kid never did anything wrong. Call the teacher, set up a conference with the principal to deal with you, not this parent's style. Show up when your soccer team plays my sons and gently speak about the situation with your dad. No, nor would I call this a situation. My solution? I'll volunteer as playground monitor. But not yet. First, 10 weeks of lifting weights, bicep curls and lat pull downs, and Pilates for core strength and balance, so when you knock some child's hat off, trip the small girl playing tag, or tease the boy who had an accident last year in kindergarten with whatever euphemism kids use for shit these days, and you're in front of me waiting to see my outstretched hand point you toward the school office, I can instead clutch a handful of your hair and lift your 55-pound body clear off the ground and hold you there, no matter that your skinny legs flutter kick the air. At the end of my parallel to the ground arm, in my grip, strong enough to pop a tennis ball, I'll only hold you suspended as long as your hair's roots allow. Of course I can't do this to you. You know as much, and that's why you bully. My son must learn to deal with you and all ages of your shouting, shoving, shirt neck pulling ilk. He's learning to ignore you, to ask for help when it's beyond his control, to turn the other cheek, and even when to run. Little Napoleon of the wood chip island around the swing set and the slides, watch him with his friends. May he teach you someday not to give chase, but to careen with them in playground pretend. Join their rounding up of sci-fi amusement park escaped and bully child eating dinosaurs. Shoot an imagined lasso-firing rifle. Lash those beasts on flatbeds bound for cages with electrified fences high as the school building before you all line up quietly at the bell. So, poem from this chapbook. I wrote this when I was on sabbatical, and I had this time at a writer's retreat for about a month, and I was there as a friend. Right, seemed to have her marriage falling apart, and she kept wanting my advice and sympathy and support, right? And it was out in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, so I didn't have good cell service unless on my phone, unless I would kind of walk outside to a certain spot in the area, and so every once in a while during the day I'd walk out there and there'd be 8 texts from her asking what to do, what was going to happen. And they had a tiny little bookshelf in the place there, and there was a book in there that had the title of this poem. I was about the only thing I could think. Eventually got to the point where I don't know what else to say to comfort and to support you here. So this poem ended up coming out of that. The title of the poem came from this book called Squids Will Be Squids. Squids will be squids is all I can think to say to you now. Having watched your marriage fall apart, having offered sympathy throughout, having tried to advise both you and him on how to approach therapy, each other, the tarnished silver cup of love from which you drink no more. Months into this you will ask, why me? And I will not offer my shoulder or some fake psychology, but I'll just say, squids will be squids, because, of course, he is a squid. Cephalopod of the order Teuthidae, with a distinct head, bilateral symmetry, a mantle and arms, 8 arms arranged in pairs, and 2, usually larger tentacles. This taxonomy does not explain why he spent 2 years pretending to love you, nor does the squid's presence in cuisines from Portugal to the Philippines offer a justification for the now omnipresence in his life of this Nancy person. The only inedible parts of a squid are the beak and the gladius, and I do not know what a gladius is. The beak, however, is hard and pointed and ranges in size from minuscule, barely visible, to almost 2.5 inches long. Sounds small, but when its point digs into your skin, hooks on a finger, hangs in your lung or heart or spleen, or rips circles around the lining of your stomach every day, the pain is unbearable. Even to the smallest one you say, stop being a squid, squid. Once you had the soft lips of a human. The good news is they solved their problems. They're back together. The bad news is I like that poem a lot, and if they're ever at a reading, I can't read it. I'm like, don't let them know this book has come out. Don't let them see that anywhere. So, let's see. I think I have time, one more poem from the book, The Alp at the End of My Street. The title actually comes from a place in the notebooks of the poet Wallace Stevens. He was writing a list of titles for poems he would write. And one of those titles for a poem he would write someday was The Alp at the End of the Street. And then years later, the poet Donald Justice wrote a poem with that title. I didn't like that as much as many of his other poems, though he's probably one of the best heirs in terms of formal and free verse to Stevens. But I was always kind of captivated by that line and that image, and the way I think it speaks to something that I've tried to do with writing, which is to take, right, the exotic thing of the natural world, whether it's a squid or European mountain, and think about how that also comes into the domestic life, right? So I like the idea that there's this Alp, this foreign thing that's there on your street. And so this actually even includes the names of streets where we used to live in Utica before we moved out of that house. If you follow, you can follow the second line in Google and you can see the picture of where that house is. So this is, though I only titled the poem about it itself, An Alp. Ballantine runs uphill, but not as steep as the Alp rising where Ballantine dead ends into Holland. That mountain wasn't there when we bought the house, or when we did the final walkthrough and found a dead skunk covered by a hefty bag on our front lawn. That's actually true. When we bought the house and went to the final walk, there's a bag on the front lawn just laying there, a black trash bag, and there's a black trash bag. I'm going to go pick it up and move it, and there's a skunk underneath it. Sorry. The skunk we moved. The Alp we can't. So I biked to work around its base, to out of shape to Tour de France my way, right up one side and down the other. It blocks out winter sun, so nothing melts around our house till mid-June, and kids from the Alps' south side come to our street to make snowmen. And their parents ask, how does Swiss Alp get to central New York? You dumbass, I think. It could be French or German. And I'm like Mad King Ludwig building a fairy tale castle here. Except, like I said, we wouldn't have moved here had we seen the Alp. Since taking up this residence and giving directions to everyone, friends, furniture delivery men, the police who came when some climber set up base camp in my dog's house, and saying the word Alp, 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 we're down the street from the Alp. I think the word sounds dumb, maybe bad, silently malicious, like something on your body, lump or cyst or polyp. I want to move because this Alp rises, a symbol for my life. It corresponds to all those horse-sized polyps and cysts I need to hack or lance my way through on the road to success and riches. It doesn't matter what those bumps stand for. Everyone's got them. Everyone's waiting for that Century 21 sign down the street to say sold, to be taken down by the moving in family of happy, helpful Sherpas. Thank you.
Just a very quick thank you to James Henry Knippen for stepping in, Gary Leising for reading, and thank you to our staff at Buffalo Books, particularly Chris, who helped to coordinate this event.